Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and we're going to break down the entire history of Planet of the Apes. Now, this video could be your introduction to apes, or it could be your refresher. The franchise has been around for more than 60 years, so it can get a little intimidating to get into, kind of like trying to get into Doctor Who or Godzilla. Long story short, it's all about leather-clad apes with guns riding horses. Now, we'll get into a longer explanation, reviewing the major storylines, the recurring themes, the remake and reboots, plus Easter eggs, some deep cuts, and also a look at the installments that never got made. And by the way, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about everything except the new movie, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And by the way, you guys, I am so excited to show you these two new ape shirts that we designed for our merch store. Oh wait, I was wrong, it was Earth all along, and what a wonderful day. Guys, we designed the merch at our merch store ourselves for you, and shopping our merch store is the best way to support our channel so we can keep making videos like this one for you guys. The link is below. It all began in 1963 with a French novel called La Planète des Singes, aka Monkey Planet. Author Pierre Boulle is best known for writing The Bridge of River Kwai. Now, Boulle was not really a fan of this book. He called it a lesser work, and he had no way of knowing what he'd spawned. Monkey Planet is a satirical novel in the tradition of Gulliver's Travels, where a character from one land is an outsider in another. The story commented on European attitudes toward other cultures. Now, of course, the movies were made in America, which changed the meaning of the metaphor. These films take on symbolism about race relations in America. Problematic recognizes problematic. The films are packed with loaded imagery. Depending on your perspective, you could call the films woke or racist, and either way, you'd be right. The original 5 films are very much of their time period, and even though they feature well-intentioned ideas, the metaphor can get pretty cringy today.
To learn more about this complicated allegory, see if your local library carries Planet of the Apes as American myth.
In 1963, producer Arthur Jacobs optioned the film rights to Monkey Planet and brought it to 20th Century Fox. Their first challenge was cracking the makeup. Early screen tests showed promise, but producer Richard Zanuck was worried that audiences would laugh when the apes appeared. Zanuck put a lot of money into the film's makeup and hired John Chambers. You might know him as the guy John Goodman played in Argo. Chambers had a medical background, creating prosthetics for wounded soldiers. He had a lot of experience crafting artificial noses, eyes, and ears. He also created Spock's ears for Star Trek. Chambers' groundbreaking ape makeup won an honorary Academy Award. Once he figured out how to craft the makeup, Chambers trained teams of artists to create the distinct look for these futuristic monkeys. The process originally took 6 hours to make up each actor, but they eventually got it down to 3. The makeup was about 20% of the film's budget. The movie required hundreds of technicians, the largest number of makeup artists ever assembled for a single film, and it cost over $1 million to transform over 200 actors into chimps, gorillas, and orangutans. Now, the reason for this big investment is that traditionally, when a gorilla appeared in a movie, it was campy. That's the opposite of what was needed for this epic science fiction tale. Planet of the Apes was a serious film, commenting on religion, corruption, racism, and war. It's also action-packed. It's the best of both worlds, a political allegory where gorillas ride horses and shoot guns. The first movie, Planet of the Apes, was released in 1968. We meet a group of American astronauts on a mission in deep space, led by Taylor, played by Charlton Heston. Now, Taylor is a cynic who's in search of some kind of intelligent life in space. The astronauts go into a deep sleep when their ship crashes on a planet. Listen closely, and you can hear the sound of TV's Batmobile in the mix of the crash. They're stranded in a strange land, and after walking around a long time, they encounter a primitive society, only to discover that these people are being hunted by intelligent apes. Taylor is shot in the neck and captured. Now, he can't speak, but he tries to communicate with Dr. Zira and her fiance Cornelius, but it's no use. He escapes his holding cell and eventually regains his voice.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
Taylor debates an orangutan named Dr. Zaius because a talking human changes everything the apes believe about history, science, and religion.
Tell me who and what you really are and where you came from, and no veterinary shall touch you.
We see the caste system in Ape City. The orangutans are politicians and leaders. Chimpanzees are intellectuals and professionals, and gorillas are military and labor.
Smile.
Taylor escapes again with the help of kindly Zira and Cornelius. He also brings along Nova, a beautiful mute woman. Once outside the city, Taylor kidnaps Dr. Zaius and goes to an archaeology site that proves that there had once been talking humans on their planet.
Would an ape make a human doll that talks?
Taylor and Nova go off into the Forbidden Zone. Once Taylor leaves, Zaius destroys the evidence and upholds the myth of ape history. And there, in the Forbidden Zone, Taylor comes face to face with a giant plot twist.
What?
Now today, we all know it, but it's hard to imagine how powerful it must have been for audiences in 1968. A season 6 episode of Mad Men shows what it was like.
So he came back to here.
In the future.
Jesus.
The screenplay was co-written by Twilight Zone creator Rod Serling, and the film's first act is very similar to a Twilight Zone episode, I Shot an Arrow into the Air. Astronauts crash land on a planet. Not all the crew members survive. The ones who do wander around a barren landscape, and the astronauts realize they were on Earth all along.
We've never left the Earth.
However, Rod Serling did not take credit for the Statue of Liberty image in the final scene. This is like Quint's monologue in Jaws, where multiple people take credit for writing it, but there's no clear answer on who is actually responsible.
You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes.
Regardless, it is a powerful finale. Planet of the Apes follows a tradition of dark fantasy stories where mankind is no longer Earth's dominant species. Other examples include Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, where birds conquer mankind. The living dead rule over the planet in Zombie and countless other zombie films. Aliens become the dominant species at the end of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And the original ending of Little Shop of Horrors shows a victory for a race of kaiju-like plants. Even the Jim Henson TV show Dinosaurs ends with a bleak finale where the dominant species dies off.
Hey, has there ever been a Planet of the Dogs?
It's actually implied in an episode of Rick and Morty, but it does take place in an alternate dimension.
Where are my testicles, Summer?
Ooh, I want to go there.
Now, Planet of the Apes is also a time travel movie. The astronauts go to the Earth 3978 more than 2,000 years in the future. Now, the franchise timeline gets a little fuzzy as the series continues, jumping back and forth in time, doing some retcons with each sequel, but most of the original Planet of the Apes movies were rated G. In fact, you might be surprised by some of this graphic violence in a G-rated film. There's also one word that almost didn't make it into the final film.
God damn you all to hell!
Goddamn was not something you'd normally hear in 1960 cinema, but the filmmakers argued that in context, Taylor is urging a supreme being to literally damn all of mankind for what they've done, so the line stayed. After Planet of the Apes came out, 20th Century Fox had a hit. The studio wanted a second one. At the time, though, sequels were not common. Arthur Jacobs hired screenwriter and poet Paul Den to write the script. So Den would become a key player, the architect of the 4 sequels. He'd written the screenplay to Goldfinger, and he'd published a book of darkly satirical poetry called Quake, 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 which was all about nuclear war, and that informed the theme of the sequel. Beneath the Planet of the Apes picks off where the first film left off. Taylor goes further into the Forbidden Zone and mysteriously disappears. We meet a few new characters, including a guerrilla general who quotes George Orwell's Animal Farm.
The only good human is a dead human.
And we meet another astronaut who was sent from Taylor's time to find the missing crew from the first movie. And by the way, this is a big plot hole since Taylor's crew was never actually supposed to return to Earth. We see more of the Forbidden Zone, including a destroyed New York City. The funny thing is, even in this post-apocalyptic rebel, the New York City rents are still outrageous. Inside the underground city is a group of telepathic mutants. They force their human captives to do battle. Now this scene resembles another famous science fiction fight. The movie tries to mimic the beats of the first film, offering surprises along the way, including a spectacular fire before the guerrilla army, and the big reveal of the mutants' dermatology problem. In the big finale, the mutants worship an atomic missile and the guerrilla army arrives. There is a bloody shootout. Again, this was rated G.
You got it, eh?
And something you should know, Charlton Heston did not want to make a sequel. He only agreed to do the film if his character died. And then he had no idea that his character blows up the planet.
I said, how about if I set off this atom bomb and blow up the whole Earth? And they said, that's very good.
The second movie ends with the destruction of the Planet of the Apes.
And one of its satellites, a green and insignificant planet, is now dead.
One of the details cut from the film was a controversial character, a human-ape hybrid. But the mere existence of this character threatened the film's G rating, so the hybrid ape boy was cut from the film. And the movie retained a G rating. The movie's budget was half the first film, and you can see where the expensive makeup was replaced by rubber masks.
All aspects of the production were affected, with the exception of the makeup and wardrobe budget.
The filmmakers thought the movie offered a definitive conclusion for the series.
That's the end of the sequels.
But beneath the Planet of the Apes made a huge profit. So, 4 months after it premiered, producer Arthur Jacobs sent a telegram to screenwriter Paul Dehn with 4 words: "Apes exist. Sequel required." Now is a good time to mention that there was no Phase 1 of the franchise. This was not like the MCU where stories were plotted out years in advance. With Planet of the Apes, they were making it up as they went along. Each film was designed to be the final chapter, but then each sequel made money, so again, screenwriter Paul Dehn had to figure out a way to keep this story going. In the third film, Escape from Planet of the Apes, the screenwriter relied on Taylor's spaceship as a vehicle to keep the story going, and allow a few characters to escape Doomsday. Now this might be the biggest stretch in the entire franchise. How are 3 chimps able to get a sunken spaceship functioning? This was the 1971 version of a convenient plot point that kept the franchise going.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
It gave viewers an inverse of the first film. 3 apes arrive in 1970s Earth. Not only was it a clever way to keep the story going, it was budget friendly because it required less makeup, fewer sets, and contemporary wardrobe. The movie goes out of its way to explain time travel and how it's possible for the futuristic apes to travel back in time.
Could you explain in terms that our viewers at home will understand how, for instance, a person could travel from time past to time future?
This is for the benefit of the characters in the movie and for the movie viewers.
Time is like a freeway with an infinite number of lanes, all leading from the past into the future.
It's explained that there are multiple futures and we are not traveling with a set destiny. Or, to quote another time travel franchise,
"No fate but what we make."
The middle of the movie delivers some light comedy. It's a fish-out-of-water story of 2 chimps in 1970s Los Angeles.
Tell me, how do you find our women? Very human.
Escape is a huge shift in perspective. The first 2 films feature apes as the antagonists, but now the chimps are heroes. The villain is Dr. Otto Haslund, a high-ranking government official who is name-dropped in the first movie.
According to Dr. Haslund's theory of time in a vehicle traveling nearly the speed of light.
The doctor is convinced that these super-intelligent apes pose a threat to mankind and must be destroyed.
No. He's got a point.
When the government discovers that Zira is pregnant, Dr. Haslund convinces the president that the baby cannot live. Zira and Cornelius become fugitives, hunted by a doctor who wants to destroy their unborn child. After the child is born, Dr. Haslund murders Zira, Cornelius, and a baby chimp. Again, this film was rated G. The good news is that Zira had pulled the switcheroo, ensuring that their intelligent child would live among the circus animals. Again, this was supposed to wrap up the trilogy, but Escape made so much money that the studio demanded a sequel. Conquest of the Planet of the Apes starts with a time jump. The film was made in 1972, but takes place in 1991, aka the near future. You can tell it's the future based on the way people are dressed.
You like your quasi-futuristic clothes, Mr. Powers?
Conquest was filmed in the newly built Century City, which also had a futuristic look to it. In the opening scene, we learned that in 1983, a mysterious plague had killed off all cats and dogs. So now apes have become pets and domesticated servants. The first half of the film shows the ape labor force being trained and tortured. The second half of the film shows Caesar plotting an ape uprising. Caesar is the now-grown son of Zira and Cornelius. He's played by Roddy McDowall, who had portrayed Cornelius in the previous films. Caesar is purchased in a scene that looks like a slave auction, and he goes to work for the governor.
1,500 from Mr. McDonald for His Excellency Governor Brett.
When the government realizes that Caesar is the descendant of the intelligent apes from the future, they do what any government would do: they torture him. It's a brutal torture scene, but Caesar's life is spared by a sympathetic human who shuts down the power grid. Believed to be dead, Caesar leads an ape revolution.
But I saw you die. The king is dead. Long live the king!
The climactic sequences are supposed to look like the Watts Uprising that took place in Los Angeles in 1965. Now, this is the very definition of problematic.
That's racist.
The filmmakers offered a sympathetic view of the protesters, but they're presented as apes who are played by white people.
That's racist.
A well-intentioned but politically messy studio picture from 52 years ago.
Wait, so this was rated G?
No. Conquest of the Planet of the Apes was the first to not get a G rating.
Well, yeah, that makes sense.
It was PG. It's graphic, it's violent, it's the only entry in the original saga that wasn't adapted into a Power Records audio recording and comic book. When Conquest first screened, mothers dragged their kids out of the theater. The previous movies were more or less family-friendly entertainment, in an early 70s sort of way. But Conquest went too far, too dark, and too bloody. The movie went so hard that the studio was forced to change the ending. Test audiences did not like the bleak finale where Caesar kills the governor and begins a revolution. The idea was that after Caesar gives a rousing speech calling for revolution,
what you have seen here today, apes on the 5 continents will be imitating tomorrow.
But then he pivots and walks it back. But instead of just going back to reshoot the ending, they just added a voiceover and hoped that nobody could tell that it was tacked on.
But now we will put away our hatred.
Feels like a mixed message, but 20th Century Fox was cool with it.
Now I kind of want to see that bleak ending.
The director's cut is included on the Conquest of the Planet of the Apes Blu-ray, with the original ending. The story seems to have come full circle. These 4 films are like the 4 movements in a symphony. When viewed together, we see how Earth became a planet ruled by chimps, orangutans, and gorillas. But the studio wanted another sequel, and that's how we got 1973's Battle for the Planet of the Apes. After the darkness of Conquest, this was intended as a kids' movie. The film begins in the year 2670 AD, with the framing device featuring Lawgiver, a figure from the first 2 movies.
In search of greener pastures, where ape and human might forever live in friendship, according to divine will.
Lawgiver is played by legendary filmmaker John Huston. He acted in classic films like Chinatown and directed The Maltese Falcon. But some of you might know him as the voice of Gandalf in The Hobbit.
Your story, Bilbo, has the ring of truth, yes?
Lawgiver recaps the previous 2 movies as historic events. He reveals that a 3rd World War took place after Conquest, but doesn't give any specific details.
The surface of the world was ravaged by the vilest war.
But then Lawgiver introduces this new film as a crossroads in ape history. This film we're watching takes place in the year 2001, a full decade after the Night of Fires. You'll notice that in the 10 years since Conquest, the apes have abandoned their jumpsuits. Instead, they've created the iconic tunics. Now, this would prove to be a fashion that never goes out of style, since Lawgiver is still wearing it over 600 years later, and apes continue to dress this way for centuries.
So the apes developed a new style of clothing, but they're still using the Gregorian calendar?
Yeah, it's weird, right? Roddy McDowall returns to play Caesar in a story about a power struggle. The plot of Battle is a lot like RoboCop. The same way RoboCop has to contend with criminals and an evil corporation, Caesar is dealing with conflict from both the outside and the inside. Outside, there's a band of humanoid mutants who want to kill all apes. Inside his community, apes and humans are struggling to live in harmony. The film shows characters living in the trees. There's a Garden of Eden atmosphere, which sets the stage for a Cain and Abel story. When an ape named Aldo kills Caesar's son, this is the first time an ape has ever killed another ape, violating the most sacred law.
Ape has never killed ape.
The death of a child prompts one of the biggest themes of the film. Will Caesar respond with forgiveness or vengeance? The previous films had timeless themes, plus a lot of dialogue about God and God's will.
We are still God's chosen.
Oh God, bless, we pray you.
God created the ape in his own image.
Am I defying God's will or obeying it?
It is God's will that he be dominated with compassion.
Battle feels topical today because there's so much talk about guns.
We want guns!
Which is part of the struggle for power.
The only thing that counts in the end is power.
Battle for the Planet of the Apes has ideas that are big, but the budget wasn't. So the movie's final battle doesn't feel powerful. The sequel had the smallest funding of the original 5 films. Director J. Lee Thompson is working with a fraction of the money that they had in the first Apes movie. Action scenes are limited. They're filmed with close-ups and a lot of cutting. Fans refer to this sequel as the one with the school bus. That bus is the 1973 version of Kate Mara's Fantastic Four wig. The cheapness is a reflection of how little the studio cared about this entry. Director George Miller cites this ragtag low-budget battle sequence as an influence on the Road Warrior, and I believe it.
And so began the journey north to safety.
So, the apes defend themselves from the mutants.
Now fight like apes!
In the director's cut, the surviving mutants form the underground cult that worships the Alpha Omega bomb, setting up the events for Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Glory be to the bomb and to the holy fallout as it was in the beginning.
Meanwhile, back in Ape City in the year 2001, Caesar confronts Aldo. They go up to the trees where Caesar avenges his son's death. Now Caesar has to live with the fact that he too has committed the ultimate sin of killing a fellow ape.
Should one murder be avenged by another?
The epilogue monologue goes back to Lawgiver talking to a group of children, both human and ape. These kids are not getting along. The last thing we see is a statue of Caesar crying a single tear. Can the apes change their course of history and live together in peace, or are they doomed to the explosive future that we've seen before? Each viewer can interpret this ending however they see fit.
Like the bowl is half empty or half full.
Something like that, yeah.
I mean a bowl of food.
Yeah, sure, I got it.
Not the toilet bowl. I don't do that anymore.
I'm glad to hear it, buddy. So Fox marketed the 5th movie as the final chapter. Now, of course, these days we know that phrase rarely means a series is actually over, but at the time, they must have meant it, because that was the end of the original saga. The Planet of the Apes movies are like the 5 fingers that make a fist. They're clearly uneven, but they add up to something bigger that really packs a punch. There wouldn't be another official theatrical Planet of the Apes movie for another 28 years, but in the meantime, there was a lot more ape media on the horizon. In 1974, the Apes ventured into a new frontier, television. CBS aired an hour-long action drama during prime time called Planet of the Apes. 2 more astronauts find themselves in this distinct dystopia. Roddy McDowall plays a different chimp, an ally named Galen. The astronauts look like Starsky and Hutch.
Yeah, well, we could have landed in a worse place, I'll tell you that.
The show's villain is Dr. Zaius, alongside a new character named General Urko. He's like the boss hog of Ape City, determined to get those darn humans.
They're a threat. They must be caught.
General Urko is played by Mark Leonard, who played Vulcan Ambassador Sarek, aka Spock's father, on Star Trek the original series. So Mark Leonard must have had a long line at the autograph conventions. Each week, the astronauts would be pursued, they'd get caught, and then they'd escape. These kind of plots happened week after week, while the astronauts tried to figure out a way to get back home. The TV series is set in the year 3085, which is nearly 900 years before the events of the first film. Although keep in mind, it could take place in an alternate timeline.
Today's TV viewers are familiar with the concept of a multiverse.
Fair enough, but that was a pretty radical idea in 1974. 2 of the show's writers were Joe Ruby and Ken Spears. They would go on to adapt other film franchises into TV shows, including Rambo and Police Academy. Plus, Planet of the Apes must have influenced another series they produced, Thundar the Barbarian, which was also set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
Humans lived here? They must have had wings.
Now, the audience for the Planet of the Apes TV show was kids, but advertisers wanted grown-up viewers, so the series was canceled after just 13 episodes.
Just 13 episodes?
Yeah, come to think of it, actually 13 is kind of a lot. I mentioned that Battle was the last theatrical film of this era. CBS would re-edit episodes of the TV series and promote them as original TV movies. So if you've ever come across an obscure title like Life, Liberty, and Pursuit on the Planet of the Apes, it's not some lost film. It's 2 episodes cut together. This was a common practice in the 70s. Just ask anyone who watched Kojak, Demon and the Mummy. 1 year later came the cartoon show.
Return to the Planet of the Apes.
The animated series aired on NBC on Saturday mornings in the fall of 1975. This cartoon features primitive animation, which modern viewers may find charming or infuriating. Once again, a team of astronauts arrive on a planet and find themselves at odds with simian rulers. Now, the year here is 3979 AD, around the same time as the events from the first movie. This version features a technologically advanced ape city, much more complex than the one we saw in the original film. Pierre Boulle's novel featured large buildings and flying machines, so this was a chance to bring his original vision to life. This installment brings back Zira, Cornelius, and Dr. Zaius. Also appearing is General Urko, voiced by the same actor that played Fred Flintstone.
Humanoids are nothing but a scourge to all of us. They should be eradicated, not studied. Just keep your eye on the ball, Bonnie boy.
Just like the live-action series, the cartoon was canceled after 13 episodes. Return to the Planet of the Apes was released on home video as part of a collector set that was housed inside a chimp head. Both of the TV series attracted young fans, so you know what that means.
Merchandising.
The 2 TV shows ushered in a ton of official tie-ins, including action figures, novels, a Marvel comic book, a magazine, trading cards, and much more.
There were 60 companies that were licensed to turn out something like 300 items, and just this flood of Apes products on the market.
Then, the original 5 films were re-released in theaters.
Now is your chance to go ape.
To promote their action figures, the Mego Toy Company sponsored marathon screenings of all 5 films.
They had Go Ape for a Day in Hempstead, Long Island. It was like they're going to show all 5 ape movies back to back.
Now, during this period, some of the strangest Apes media was a live stage show. It was only performed in the United Kingdom, with pre-recorded dialogue that the ape actors would pantomime to, while human actors recited their lines live. The show was loosely based on the TV series. It featured a chase scene where actors ran out into the audience and kids in the crowd were invited to cheer and boo during the big fight sequence between Urko and Galen. There was an outdoor arena version held in rodeos with live horses, lots of stunts, but no script. This kind of thing would never happen with today's big franchises.
Well, you know what? Maybe it would.
It's the end of the world as we know it.
Now, we don't have any footage of the Apes theater show. The closest thing we have is the Planet of the Apes float in the 1974 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. That same year, an American rock band recorded a concept album, Planet of the Apes, A Musical Trip. You can listen to the whole thing online if you dare. Here's just a taste. Meanwhile, composer Lalo Schifrin, the man who wrote the Mission Impossible theme song, created Ape Shuffle, a funky version of the Planet of the Apes music. Now, to be fair, a lot of movies released a disco version of the theme song.
There must have been a law back then.
That disco track was officially licensed. Now, there are two international Apes films that are technically non-canon. The first is Time of the Apes. This was made in Japan in 1974. Time of the Apes gained notoriety because it was featured on the third season of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Shoot it down! It's the wackiest war in the Congo!
2 years later, in 1976, a Planet of the Apes movie was produced in Brazil. Now, this is not a serious science fiction film. It's a goofball comedy. It might as well be called Not Another Planet of the Apes movie. But that wasn't the only Planet of the Apes parody. Back in the USA, the apes were showing up on variety shows. Here's a clip from The Tonight Show, where singer-songwriter Paul Williams stopped by after a day of filming for Battle for the Planet of the Apes.
This is 7 months of nothing but banana daiquiris.
Paul Williams was a successful songwriter. He wrote music for everything from The Muppet Movie to The Phantom of the Paradise. Producer Arthur Jacobs hired him as an actor, hoping he'd write songs for Battle of the Planet of the Apes. But the songs never happened, and we just have Paul Williams giving a good performance as an actor.
Caesar is Caesar. He went to the city for a reason.
Back to the parodies, apes were appearing on the Sonny and Cher show. This is the closest Planet of the Apes will ever get to making a Star Wars holiday special. And Roddy McDowall embraced his ape image seen here on the Carol Burnett Show. These TV spots were lighthearted and wildly different from the science fiction of the mid-70s. Like a lot of movies from that era, science fiction films were cynical and downbeat. Social criticism is baked into these films like a cinematic Debbie Downer. Soylent Green looked at pollution and overpopulation. Rollerball commented on violence in corporate America. Silent Running was concerned with environmental conservation. All of this would change in 1977 with the arrival of the next big science fiction franchise.
Damnation Alley.
Nope, not that one. Planet of the Apes had been the biggest science fiction saga in the world until May 25, 1977. The Apes franchise was about to be destroyed like the planet of Alderaan. George Lucas delivered a fun space opera in the tradition of Flash Gordon. His story was not set in our own bleak future. Instead, it took place a long time ago. Well, look, you know the rest. Star Wars influenced the tone of science fiction for decades to come, while taking a page from the Apes merchandising playbook. Now, this is a video about the Planet of the Apes, so I'm going to get back to the apes, but we cannot talk about the big picture without recognizing what an impact Star Wars had. Science fiction was going into a new territory as it crossed into a post-Star Wars timeline. By the 1980s, Planet of the Apes had become a part of the pop culture landscape, and it was ripe for parody.
Spaceballs? Oh shit. There goes the planet.
Some of the best-known Apes comedy bits include the time Charlton Heston hosted Saturday Night Live.
Where the hell did you learn to talk like an ape, you damn mutant?
And who doesn't love the Simpsons musical Stop the Planet of the Apes? I Want to Get Off.
Dr. Zaius, Dr. Zaius, oh, Dr. Zaius.
Some lesser-known examples include a surprising gag in Maxine's Christmas Carol where the ghost of Christmas future brings Maxine to the future.
Oops, too far.
In Planet of the Apes, the finale is reenacted by actual chimps.
Darn you, all the heck!
An outstanding mashup was created for the now-defunct Planet of the Apes fan site called The Forbidden Zone. Someone re-edited the first movie to look like a 25-minute episode of The Twilight Zone. It's presented in black and white, complete with Twilight Zone music, narration, and title cards. Now, this is a must-watch for fans of Planet of the Apes or The Twilight Zone. With so many parodies in pop culture, it was hard to imagine a new Planet of the Apes being taken seriously. But by the late 1980s, efforts were being made. First up, a script was written and sold by Adam Rifkin, screenwriter of of Mouse Hunt and The Dark Backward. Rifkin imagined a timeline where the apes reached their Roman Empire. His script, titled Return to the Planet of the Apes, would be a gladiator film. In the late 80s, gladiator films were no longer being made, so this was an inventive way to revive two genres at the same time, making an apes movie that's also a sword and sandal picture. The story followed a descendant of Charlton Heston's Taylor as he leads the humans in a slave revolt against the apes. Rifkin outlined a proposed sequel that would focus on the child of Taylor's daughter and Cornelius' son. Once again, filmmakers are taken with the idea of an ape-human hybrid because they want a film where people make love to apes.
We will raise a family.
That movie did not happen. Adam Rifkin recalls, "I can't accurately describe in words the utter euphoria I felt knowing that I, Adam Rifkin, was going to be resurrecting the Planet of the Apes. It all seemed too good to be true." I soon found out it was. By the early 90s, Oliver Stone was on board to produce a reboot. He hired Terry Hayes, screenwriter of The Road Warrior. The film would star Arnold Schwarzenegger as a scientist who goes back in time to an era when our planet was populated with apes. Fox put together a budget of $100 million, but the studio wasn't happy with the script. After several months of rewrites, the project fell apart. For years, the reboot was stuck in development hell, despite efforts to involve filmmakers like Peter Jackson, James Cameron, and Roland Emmerich. Finally, the job went to the guy who made Mars Attacks. Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes is like the George Lazenby of James Bond's. When fans saw the movie on opening night, they felt a deep disappointment. For ape fans, Burton's remake was like visiting the Glasgow Willy Wonka experience. The movie came out in the year 2001 and is set in the near future of 2029. Mark Wahlberg plays Captain Leo Davidson, an astronaut working with chimps in space. When his monkey goes missing, Leo's commanding officers forbid him from pursuing the chimp. But this guy is a maverick who doesn't follow orders.
Never send a monkey to do a man's job.
He goes into deep space and lands on a planet. It's very similar to the first movie, but with a lot of clever reversals.
Take your stinking hands off me, you damn dirty human!
The movie involves Mark Wahlberg's Leo trying to get back to his spaceship, but he's pursued by Tim Roth's Thade, a warmonger who believes that humans have no soul.
Is there a soul in there?
Leo escapes Ape City and teams up with some primitive humans and a sympathetic chimp played by Helena Bonham Carter. Along the way, Leo realizes the complicated formula for a deep space time warp and that the ancient ruins of a spaceship in the desert are from his own former spaceship when the crew went searching for him.
They're all dead because they were out looking for me.
And he understands that the apes on this planet are the descendants of the chimps from his spaceship. Understanding this convoluted math is necessary for the film's ending to make any sense. The ending is frickin' brilliant. I love it, but it's similar to a hilarious joke where you have to explain why it's funny. In the final scene, Leo goes back to Earth, but when he gets there, he sees his nemesis had gotten there first and became an emancipator of the apes. Viewers walked out of Planet of the Apes not understanding the ending and not grasping the inner workings of time travel that was used in the film. Basically, though, it's Back to the Future 2 with Thade as Biff Tannen. Unlike the original saga, the remake ends on a cliffhanger. It demands a sequel.
Not gonna happen! No, not gonna happen!
Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes features a lot of leaps. Not just leaps in logic, but literal leaps. The fight choreography must have been influenced by Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. The film is racially loaded with racial symbolism.
Can't we all just get along?
So it's similar to the earlier movies.
I don't say all humans are evil simply because their skin is white.
The film explores themes of religion.
Bless us, Holy Father, who created all apes in his image.
Which begs the question, do the apes and humans share the same God?
You just blew my mind.
The undeniable strength of this version is the makeup. It's by Rick Baker, whose work you probably know from An American Werewolf in London, Men in Black, and Hellboy. The character design's also made for some good action figures.
Planet of the Apes collection has landed, and it rules.
Maybe this is one of those movies you can best enjoy with the sound turned off. Even without audio, you can appreciate the performance by orangutan Paul Giamatti.
I can't fail this class.
Oh, don't sell yourself short, Mr. Coates. I truly believe that you can.
The other very noticeable detail in Burton's version is the sexual tension. There's no chemistry between Mark Wahlberg and Estella Warren.
You're hurt.
She's holding on pretty tight.
Instead, check out the romantic spark between Mark Wahlberg and Helena Bonham Carter. When the film was released, there were rumors of an interspecies sex scene. Sometimes it was reported as a scene that was cut from the script. Director Tim Burton wanted Mark Wahlberg's astronaut character to get intimate with Helen Bonham Carter's simian princess. Other times, unnamed sources insist that the scene was filmed. A friend of Bonham Carter confirms that the scene was in there originally, but the studio freaked out. Fox would never allow it because they needed to make this movie appealing to kids. This is the first Apes movie to receive a PG-13 rating, and it would have been rated R or worse if it featured a man-on-chimp sex scene. For decades, filmmakers have been titillated by this taboo, so now we might as well mention the other unofficial entry in this franchise, the porn parodies. Titles include The Playmate of the Apes and The Planet of the Erotic Ape. Now, we're not going to show any footage from either of those movies, but here's a parody of an Apes porn parody made by the guy who wrote this video.
It's so confusing for a lonely space traveler like me.
It's clear from the ending of the 2001 Planet of the Apes that the studio was planning on a sequel. The movie opened big and made money, but a sequel never happened. In an interview with The Guardian, Tim Burton said he would rather jump out a window than make another Apes movie. Audiences would have to wait a few years for another installment. So let's take a look at the James Franco Ape movie.
There's a gorilla in my apartment!
Whoops, wrong movie. In 2005, James Franco starred in an indie comedy titled The Ape, a movie which he also directed and co-wrote.
Yeah, I wonder if that helped him land his role in Rise of the Planet of the Apes.
Oh, maybe. 6 years later, James Franco was starring in an unofficial Apes reimagining. Rise of the Planet of the Apes premiered in the summer of 2011. That was the time when studios were converting their big releases into 3D during post-production. So you had movies that were shot in 2D, but as an afterthought, they were reconfigured as 3D movies.
Even though they weren't written for 3D, storyboarded for 3D, or shot in 3D.
Correct. This happened with Thor, Green Lantern, The Smurfs, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, and many other films that year. You might think Fox would try that tacked-on gimmick with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but they didn't. It's as if the studio was so confident in their smart, exciting science fiction adventure that they didn't need a gimmick.
Or maybe they already had a gimmick.
Right. A talking animal is a great gimmick.
Yeah, it's okay.
Now, this is the first of the Apes movies that didn't feature prosthetic makeup. Even if you're not a fan of CGI, you have to admit they look better than the rubber suit gorillas in Escape.
And your goddaughter, Salome.
Now, we've already posted a full recap of this franchise on the channel, so we're not going to go into the minutiae of every little detail, but we're still going to talk about this because it is an important part of Apes history. The movie begins in the present day, not the far future, not even the near future. It's happening in our time. James Franco plays Will Rodman, a scientist who's developing a drug to treat Alzheimer's disease. His formula works wonders on the brain of its test subject, creating a super intelligent chimp named Bright Eyes. On the day of the big presentation, the main chimp goes ape and wreaks havoc. The research project is shut down, and that's when Will discovers Bright Eyes had given birth. Will brings the little guy home as a pet, and his father names him Caesar. The animal inherited his mother's intelligent brain. Over time, Caesar feels out of place, not sure if he's a pet or a person.
What is Caesar?
After a violent outburst, Caesar is taken from his home and placed in an animal shelter among non-super intelligent apes. It's like a prison movie where the new guy has to show dominance. Caesar gains the respect of his peers and becomes their leader, and then it turns into a prison escape movie. The real star of the movie is Andy Serkis, who plays Caesar. It's an incredible performance, rich with emotion. It is the most moving CGI ape performance since, well, Andy Serkis' King Kong. Rise of the Planet of the Apes falls into a very specific subgenre of films, movies where a school bus has trouble going over the Golden Gate Bridge. See also Dirty Harry, the 2014 Godzilla, and of course, Superman.
Okay, kids, it's all right now. Hey, it's Superman.
Now, it's also possible that the bus is a nod to the school bus in Battle for the Planet of the Apes. This movie has a lot of subtle and some not so subtle callbacks to previous entries. Rise and Conquest both feature an ape named Caesar being led around on a leash by a friendly human owner before he's forced to live among less intelligent apes. There are some obvious allusions to the first Planet of the Apes.
It's a madhouse! Take your stinking paw off me, you damn dirty ape! No!
Plus a news story about astronauts going into space and then getting lost. If this reboot series keeps going, though, we might go far enough into the future to see if astronauts land in this same timeline. There's a scene where Will visits his father as he lays dying. That could be a nod to one of the best scenes in Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes, where General Thade comforts his dying father, who was played by Charlton Heston.
Their ingenuity goes hand in hand with their cruelty.
And in another parallel to the Burton movie, Rise features some non-chemistry between the two human leads. And of course, Rise echoes Conquest because both films lead up to a spectacular uprising where the apes have a battle with the police, and they win. And finally, the movie ends with Caesar finding his true home, the same way the first film ends with Taylor realizing that he is home.
I'm home. Caesar's home.
The concept of home becomes a recurring theme throughout the new trilogy, with apes trying to find their home.
Home!
Next comes another time leap from 2011 to 2014, and that is when Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was released. It was filmed in traditional 2D, but this time the studio did give it an upgrade to 3D during post-production. Footnote: Rise of the Planet of the Apes did get a 3D release on home video. By now, I'm sure some of you have already noted this in the comments section back when we were talking about the 2011 Summer of 3D. I guess I should have mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, but then again, comments drive up the algorithm, so good job.
Thank you. Now, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes belongs to a very specific subgenre, a sequel where an apocalypse takes place between the first and second film. The only other example to do this is Mad Max and The Road Warrior.
A whirlwind of looting, a firestorm of fear.
Oh, and there's this world war that takes place between Conquest and Battle for Planet of the Apes. There you go. This story takes place 10 years after the events of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. The so-called simian flu wiped out most of the human population. Apes are living in the woods where they continue to gain intelligence. Early on, we see an orangutan teaching young apes to read and write, which echoes the classroom scene in Battle. A group of human survivors are about to run out of supplies, and because they're about to run out of power, they need to connect with a dam in the woods. That's where they meet Caesar's tribe and things get tense. The rest of the movie is about the tension between apes and humans. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was directed by Matt Reeves, who would go on to direct The Batman, which begs the question, when will Matt Reeves make a Gorilla Grodd movie?
Grodd is ready.
The human leader is played by Gary Oldman, who doesn't make a big impression, but here's the thing for the theater kid / ape nerd Venn diagram. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern both went on to play villains in Planet of the Apes reboots.
That's it then, is it?
Guns play a big role in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and that connects to nearly all of the films.
I'm pretty handy with this. Of that I'm sure.
There's a bloodbath of both apes and men in Beneath. More fatal gunplay in Escape. So much gunfire in Conquest.
There will be but one control method. Shoot to kill.
Fire!
And more dialogue in Battle showing the apes' relationship with guns.
We want guns. Guns are power.
Power corrupts, and now the corrupted apes are becoming more like men. It's just like the final line in George Orwell's Animal Farm, where you can no longer tell the difference between the men and the animals. And lastly, there's a great scene about man's relationship with guns in Tim Burton's film. Specifically, what happens when apes mess around with man's tools of power.
Long arm. Our strength means nothing.
So let's take a moment to appreciate that the dialogue is being delivered by Charlton Heston.
From my cold, dead hands.
So Dawn really gets into the gun stuff.
We need to give them our guns.
Showing how the power of gunpowder infects the ape community. It's complicated because Dawn of the Planet of the Apes offers a sobering commentary on the dangers of firearms. But also, that just looks so damn cool. Another easy to miss connection, Dawn and Conquest both feature a dramatic scene where Caesar gets upset. Now, you might think that that's a stretch, but when Conquest screens in movie theaters, people in the audience shout that line. Dawn also has a lot in common with Battle for the Planet of the Apes. Caesar's level-headed optimism is contrasted by the anger of a fellow ape. In Battle, there's Aldo, who wants to wage war. In Dawn, it's Koba, who is incapable of trusting humans. Both movies end with a question. How can apes and humans coexist in peace? And is that even possible? At the end of Dawn, it's clear that the sequel is coming.
War has already begun.
Technically, War for the Planet of the Apes wouldn't happen for another 3 years. It hit theaters in 2017. Once again, it was filmed in 2D but released in 3D, just like another sequel that came out that year. So let's get into war. The war in the movie is between the apes and humans. The apes are led by Caesar, and the human army is led by Woody Harrelson, who strikes the right balance of menace. No offense to Gary Oldman in the last film, but this is how you play the human villain in an Apes movie.
This is a holy war. If we lose, we'll be the last of our kind.
Harrelson plays the role like he's Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now. The movie has a lot of Vietnam tropes, from the look of the soldiers in the jungle to the Jimi Hendrix song on the soundtrack.
Hey, Joe. Where you going with that gun, yo?
And the soldiers refer to the apes as Kong.
Colonel, we've got eyes on 3 Kong in the North Woods.
In the 1960s, U.S. soldiers called the Vietnamese Communist Army Viet Cong, or Kong for short. So, War for the Planet of the Apes really paved the way for Kong Skull Island. A few new characters joined the series. Bad Ape is the first real comic relief in an Apes movie. Once you get used to the layers of social commentary, there's room for a backwards binoculars gag.
Oh no! Why so small?
Bad Ape is played by Steven Zahn. Now here's a character actor who brings his A game to every project. Equally comfortable appearing in Rescue Dawn or Saving Silverman. He is an upgrade to the movie franchise. We also see some donkey gorillas. Now these are the apes who betrayed Caesar in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And now they've teamed up with humans because they fear Caesar is going to have them executed. Along the way, Caesar and his crew pick up Nova, a seemingly mute young girl. 2017 was a big year for movies with seemingly mute young girls.
You can talk. Well, what's all this bullshit been for the last 2,000 miles?
Thematically, War continues to explore some of the ideas around interspecies relationships. This is also the first of the reboots to invoke Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
On the eve of a holy war!
This is a holy war.
Not only are we dealing with a holy war, but the bad guys are a paramilitary group called Alpha Omega. That's a reference to the underground mutants who worship the Alpha Omega bomb. And the same way Taylor sets off the missile that kills everyone, Caesar detonates the Alpha Omega gas tank. The same way a few lucky apes escape the deadly explosion and escape from Planet of the Apes, Caesar and his tribe avoid being destroyed in the avalanche that's set off by the explosion. The final scene in War shows Caesar leading his tribe to the Promised Land. And, once again, it's an Eden-like paradise, similar to the Eden-like community of Battle for the Planet of the Apes. War was the last Apes movie, but the Apes media kept coming. 4 months after the film debuted, PlayStation released Planet of the Apes: Last Frontier. This is a huge improvement over the game from 16 years earlier. There have also been a number of Planet of the Apes novels. If you've read any, please go to the comments and tell us which ones are the best to read. But please, limit your recommendations to the top 5.
The top 2. I'm not much of a reader.
Meanwhile, it's been a golden age for Planet of the Apes graphic novels. We have gotten a lot of crossover titles with some sanctioned stories featuring Tarzan, Green Lantern, and King Kong, which makes sense since both stories technically take place in New York. One of the standout comic crossovers involves Planet of the Apes and Star Trek. This graphic novel is remarkably faithful to both franchises. The story takes place between the first 2 films, and the book explains how Scotty and the crew of the Enterprise helped Zira and Cornelius repair the busted spaceship. A huge plot hole that has now been addressed.
Well, I'll sleep better tonight.
We all will. Lastly, there's a 2018 comic adaptation from Rod Serling's screenplay. This version features the metropolitan ape city instead of the abodes and huts seen in the 1968 film. The graphic novel was adapted by Dana Gould, who knows a few things about the Apes franchise. He hosts a YouTube talk show as Dr. Z.
Hello! Whoa!
So, now we're all caught up. It's been 7 years since the last movie, and now we've got Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes coming out. As of this recording, I have not seen it yet, so I can only wonder, is this the film that will finally show us a love child born of man and ape? Big shout out to the writer of this video, Kevin Marr. You can find links to his socials below and his channel, Atomic Abe. So, let us know what you thought of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Let us know in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.